Good evening. It's Sunday, just after 10 p.m. from a hot and humid London. Welcome to Wicked Women. We took a little bit of a break last week. These things happen, but we're back. We're back here, and we're looking forward to doing the show. Welcome to everyone, one and all, whether you're watching us live or you're watching us on catch up. I'm going to bring in the lady from Virginia who puts the wicked into being my co-host, the lovely Val. Let me bring her in. There she is, my girl.
Hello.
How you doing?
And believe me, it is definitely hot and humid. My neck is red.
Yeah, it's pretty hot and humid here as well. How has your week been?
About normal, almost normal.
Almost normal.
Just
almost
normal. It's getting there, I think.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I've had a really good week, so I can't complain. So it makes a difference, doesn't it? It makes a difference when just everything's very different. We have to apologize for the lovely Carly who can't be here tonight. She so wanted to be here, but unfortunately she's got some family issues, so she couldn't be with us. So it's just me and Val, just hanging out with me and Val. What else do you do on a Sunday evening? We're in Virginia, in London. Oh, I know. You come along to Wicked Women, and here we are. I want to say hello to everybody that's joined us tonight. Hi, Phil Guy. Hi, Sandra, my fellow Londoner. Hi, Alison. Hi, Colleen. And to everybody else that's watching us on Wicked Women, 888 YouTube and Twitter. And also the Dark Huntress, and of course Val, Carly, and my Facebook page. We're all live from there. So having that said, we've got an amazing topic tonight, and we've been doing a series, and we're almost at the end of this little series that we've been doing. And we started to talk about it last October, and then we couldn't do it, and then we thought, right, we're starting doing it now. And I've been really excited about this one because it's about, tonight we're looking at the Pendle, which is Salem, and also the Dunning witches as well, which not many people know about, but we've included them because they were in Scotland. And there is one more show to come in this series, and we will tell you more about that at the end. So Val, when we were looking at this, about what kind of went on, she says, putting her glasses on so she can read.
I might as well not have mine on. Mine are fogged up and I can't see anyway. So
we wanted to do these women justice because obviously their story's been told many, many times. And as fellow witches ourselves, we wanted to absolutely give out positive stuff. But unfortunately, it's not great. And I want to sort of look at we're going to come to Salem, but we're going to deal with Pendle first of all, because it all started with the Malleus Maleficarium, the book that was written about, I think it was in the 14th century by a monk who obviously felt he was well equipped to tell everyone what to do with women.
I do believe he was jaded.
Oh, I think so. And obviously then we come to, and we were looking at two gentlemen tonight. We'll come to one of them a bit later, but we're going to start by looking at James VI of Scotland and the First of England. Now, if anyone knows anything about the history of the United Kingdom, they'll all know about Elizabeth I and how the England's golden age it was when she was our queen, Elizabeth I. And when she died, her kingdom was inherited by James I of England and James VI of Scotland. And this gentleman plays a really big part in what actually happened along the way, because he was due to marry Anne of Denmark. She was going to come and marry him, and she'd married him via proxy, and she was due to come to Scotland to meet a new husband. Can you remanage that? Back in the old days when they chose your husband for you, and you're like, we're putting her on a ship. But she didn't arrive. The journey was an absolute disaster, and fierce storms damaged her ship, and she was forced to anchor in Norway. some might say she had a lucky escape. A second attempt to set sail for the shores of England was made, but once again her ship sprung a leak and had to return to Norway. Kind of think there's a message there.
I started to say, I think there's like a sign somewhere.
Go Viking, go Viking.
Yeah.
So with winter setting in, weather was expected to be bad, so it was postponed, and it wasn't until spring she actually came to the UK. So back in Scotland, he was pretty unhappy about this. Then he couldn't have he would have to wait a long time to see his bride, and he made the decision to go to Norway to fetch his queen, and ended up staying for several months. When they came back to Scotland, the journey was successful, although they were battered by storms. And I can tell you, being on a ship back then across the English Channel, which is one of the roughest in the world, buffeted, you would spend most of your time over the side of the ship, I would imagine.
I know I would.
But because of what happened is this is what ignited James I's obsession with witchcraft. In Denmark, witches were blamed for the storm that damaged her ship and stopped her from traveling. And a trial was held in Copenhagen in 1590, resulting in the executions of accused women. And this wasn't unusual in Denmark, as there have been a lot of witch trials. So when he came back to Scotland, he began his own witch hunt. And witches were accused of trying to kill the king and queen by calling up the strong storms. And one of these accused witches was a wise woman named Agnes Sampson. Under torture, she confessed to things that were so miraculous and strange that even James found them difficult to believe. Allegedly, Agnes whispered to the king and said that telling him only private words that he'd said between him and Anne. Therefore, he believed she was a witch. And that's exactly what began his trials with witchcraft. Something as simple as bad weather stopping his future wife from coming to the UK. So he decided to start his own witch trials, and that is where we start to look at Pendle. Did you have a look at Pendle?
I focused more on Salem, and I thought I would learn something from you.
Vice versa. In 1597, James released Demonology, a treatise about witchcraft. And although his own fever for witch hunting seemed to have waned, the fear of witches among the population had taken hold, and large-scale witch trials took place along Scotland well into the 17th century. 17th! And an estimated 3,000 people, mostly women, were accused. And then under the union of the Scottish and English crowns, it then spread to Great Britain, to England. Demonology laid out information how to identify a witch and how to punish them. One way to seek out a witch was in the use of charm and herbs, by curing the worm, by stemming of blood, by healing of horse crooks, by turning of the riddle, of doing such like innumerable things by words without applying anything meet to the part offended. Now, this sounds like crazy in our world today, but this guy, James I, this is the King of England. People are going to take his word for it. And it's like, this is the king. And so, he set out to do the witch trials. And that's where we come in to Pendle. Now, Pendle, a lot of people have heard about Pendle. And unfortunately, it was a very, very sad story. And I've been doing a bit of, it was on a show actually recently over here. And it's actually a witch trial that actually made history, because it was a very, very young witness that actually, unfortunately, led to the downfall of her family. And I realize, Val, when we talk about witchcraft and these trials, it wasn't just here, it was in Salem that children were used. were part of trials.
They were a big part of the Salem trials.
They were. So we're just to look at some of the Pendle. So children as young as 3 have given evidence in court cases in recent times, but in the past, anyone under the age of 14 was unreliable. They were like, no. But 9-year-old Janet Device was an illegitimate beggar and would have been lost to history but for her role in one of the most disturbing trials on record. Her evidence in the 1612 Pendle witch trial in Lancashire led to the execution of 10 people, including all of her family.
And she was how old?
She was 9.
That would have to weigh on you, knowing that you're telling them something they just want to hear, and it ends up with.
Absolutely. And it's very upsetting that a child of 9 could lead to our family's downfall. So at the moment, if you can picture life in the Great Britain in 1612, everyone was paranoid about witchcraft. It was an epidemic. Imagine COVID back in 1612, but it was this time about witches. And everybody.
It makes me think of like aliens and things like that today.
Yeah.
People are so afraid, and they're afraid to, it's like they're afraid to say it because people will think they're crazy. But back then, if you said it, people think that you're in league with the devil.
And I also think that you would be so scared to say or do anything that could be taken as witchcraft. At this time, as you say, James I was on the throne, living in fear of a Catholic rebellion after the aftermath of Guy Fawkes, which everybody in the UK is aware of, the gunpowder treason and plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament with the royal family in it. And the king had a reputation, quite a few actually, as an avid witch hunter, and wrote a book called Demonology. And he believed it was the book you would use to hunt witches. And at the time, Lancashire, up in the northern part of England, had a reputation for being full of troublemakers and basically peasants, lower class people, poor people. And Janet, who was 9, lived with her mother, Elizabeth, her grandmother, an older sister, and brother James in the shadow of the Pendle Hill. So we're talking right out in the country. Lots of greenery, very poor, but a beautiful part of Britain. Yeah. The villagers dubbed her grandmother a cunning woman. Now, back then, that would be seen also a wise woman, a woman that you go to get things done. And in March 1612, Alison, the sister of Janet, cursed a peddler who would not give her any pins. The peddler collapsed, and his son reported it to an ambitious local magistrate, who then acted on it and interviewed Alison, who confessed to bewitching the peddler, but also accused their neighbours, who the family were having a feud with, of bewitching and killing 4 people. Then neighbours started. Here it comes. The neighbours then started to put the fingers right back at Demdike, accusing her of witchcraft. Yeah. Now, you can imagine if you're a guy in power back then, you got more money and more power by actually bringing people to trial for being witches. You were seen to have, it was his route to success. And he also wanted to bring anything that was a non-conformist, that could be a Catholic or could be a witch, and bring them to justice. He arrested Alison, the grandmother, as well as their neighbours and her daughter. Now, this is a bit I don't understand, Val, because Janet's mother hosted a party on Good Friday when all good citizens should have been at church. And a local constable heard rumours of a meeting of witches, so arrested everyone And the family also implied others. And everybody was pointing the finger at everyone about using witchcraft. And at the time, you can imagine this neighbor did this neighbor did that. Everybody was out for their own end. And in his book, Demonology, James I wrote, children, women, and liars can be witnesses over high treason against God. And this influenced Noel, who was the constable of that area, to bring in the 9-year-old Janet as his key witness. And there's lots of notes written on this. There's books written on this. And Janet's mother, Elizabeth, screamed when her daughter entered the court. Janet demanded her mother be removed and then climbed on a table and calmly denounced her as a witch. Her evidence was so convincing by the jury, and after a 2-day trial, all of her family and most of her neighbors were found guilty of causing death or harm by witchcraft, and the day after they were all hanged at Gallows Hill. But her influence, this 9-year-old's influence, Val, went so far beyond Lancashire that her evidence was then included in a reference handbook for magistrates. So it was then used in England and in America and led them to seek the testimony of children in trials of witchcraft. So at the notorious Salem witch trials in 1692, most of the evidence was given by children. Now, this is why Pendle and Salem are so important, because they're sister witches. I mean, there are sister witch trials. Pendle came first, Salem came later.
Well, see, they have so many similarities. There's 2 feuding families in Salem.
Yeah.
And they were, pretty close. It was the Putnams and the Porters. And they were pretty close to, the same thing. The start of their feud it fueled the Salem trials.
And I think that this is why you think from these actions, from a king who couldn't get his queen here for bad weather, 2 men writing 2 books about witchcraft, and then someone's, cursing someone, being spiteful, whatever. But Janet, unfortunately, fell victim to the very precedent she set herself in 1633, because 20 years after the trial, she was also accused of witchcraft, along with 16 others, by a 10-year-old, Edmund Robinson. And they were found guilty by a jury, but the judges were not happy. And they became more skeptical, wanting more and more evidence. And then Edmund eventually admitted lying because of the stories he'd heard about the Pendle witch trial. And the last known record of Janet's device was in 1636. Despite having been acquitted, she was not allowed to leave Lancaster Castle until she had paid her board for the time she spent there. For someone like Janet, that would have been impossible. So she probably died in that vicinity of Lancaster Castle. Now, I don't know about you, Val, but if my 9-year-old niece or my 9-year-old sister accused us all of being witches, and it led to all of us being hung, how would you live with yourself as you got older? I mean, this young girl was actually primed by a lot of these judges and men around the trial.
I was going to say, I wonder what she was told, or what they told her about her family to make her testify against it.
Well, they took her in, I believe, and she would have been forced.
Nowadays, people can be bought.
Yeah.
I wonder back then, was she given things? Was she promised this great life, this better life, if she went along with what they said?
And obviously none of that happened, because she ended up being trialed for witchcraft herself and kept in Lancaster Castle. And let's be honest, if you were taken to one of those places back then,
Yeah.
unless some miracle happened, you never came out.
But that's the thing. She was 9.
She was 9.
Could be manipulated into this thing, into saying pretty much whatever they wanted her to say.
Well, I mean, James, looking at James the First, this is a man who's used to getting his own way. And he actually even did his own torture on certain women. He actually used certain instruments as well. And this is the King of England. And he actually believed that the only punishment for a witch was death. Until 1727, when the Janet Horne became the last woman in Britain tried and executed as a witch. We're talking 1727. I mean, when you think about it, you'd have thought we'd have moved on from then. But before we come to Salem, because this is one of the things we wanted to look at, was the Witchfinder General. Because I wanted to do the first half on Pendle and then come to Salem. But it's like men seem to have gone out of their way. And I use this, because we're looking back in the 16th century.
Mm-hmm.
A king, constables, it's all about success, it's all about money, it's about power, and fear breeds power. And these were poor women. These were women that were poor. They all lived together, and even the brother was found guilty of witchcraft and hung. And they would have been tortured, not before they died. They would have been tortured, and it wouldn't have been pretty. And you would have been very much baited to give the other person up. And I believe that the grandmother and the mother of Janet and all the family kept their innocence right to the end, was like, we're not witches. Although for the sister, it all began with her because she cursed the peddler. With Salem, I know frenzies, stuff like that takes over. And I want to bring in Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General, because he plays a really big part in what happened later on in Salem. And I'm trying to get this done so we can move on to Salem, because we also have the other one. But if you think about it, what is a Witchfinder General? What a great name. I'm a Witchfinder General. Apparently, it's only when he moved to Essex. He was a lawyer with a very pure background, puritanical of anything against God's work was work of the devil. And he believed that several witches were practicing. Have you got Matthew Hopkins up there, honey? Have you got him there?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Of the 23 women accused of witchcraft, 4 were said to have died in prison, with 19 convicted and hanged. So this man took no prisoners. Tell us a bit about his ways, Val, and also what he's used to use for his gadget to prove that you were a witch.
Let's see. Hopkins believed that there were several witches regularly practicing their dark arts close to his home, and apparently began his career as a witch finder after he overheard various women discussing their meetings with the devil in March 1644. Of the 23 accused of witchcraft, 4 were said to have died in prison, with 19 later convicted and hanged. He appears to have assumed the title, let's see.
Witchfinder General.
Officially commissioned by Parliament. Let's see. Trying to find his.
I think if the methods that he used, he often took those from demonology, which was King James' bestseller.
Yeah. Just trying to find. Actually, he used lady pickers. Their job involved cutting the arm of the accused with a knife, needle, or pin. And if they did not bleed, she was said to be a witch. But a lot of times the blades and the needles were retractable. They made them retractable. Therefore, if they wanted them to be a witch, they would be a witch, because they would put it in there and it appeared to go in the skin, but it actually retracted into itself. So there was no pain. So they didn't cry out. They didn't bleed. It was healed when they moved it back. Hopkins' favorite conventional method, torture, however, was the infamous swimming test. This unbelievably simple but effective test involved binding the arms and legs of the accused to a chair, therefore throwing them into the village pond. If they sank and drowned,
they would
be innocent. They would be innocent if they sank and drowned and be received into heaven. If they floated, they would be tried as a witch. Between the years 1644 and 1646, Hopkins and his associates were believed to have been responsible for the deaths of 300 women. And in the days when an average farm worker's wage was 6 pence a day, it's estimated that Hopkins may have collected fees around £1,000 for his gruesome services.
Yeah.
He even wrote a short pamphlet detailing witch hunting methods, which is the discovery of witches, which is what you were talking about. The swimming trial was his favorite.
So that's basically putting her on a chair and tying her up, and then putting her again and again into water. And if she managed to hold her breath or get away, that was ending badly.
Yeah. But if you died, well, you was free and you were a saint, I guess.
Win-win situation.
Yeah, right.
I also, with Matthew Hopkins, though, like there are talks there was sexually, torture as well. They would obviously strip you naked. They would check your body out for certain marks from the devil, including moles. And imagine how that is. You've got men in front of you.
Hey, I'd be screwed. I would be screwed so bad.
And he would be looking at you and be checking every part of you out. You would have absolute no privacy. And if you had anything that they wanted to just say was a witch or could have been a witch, then they would have actually done it. The thing about him,
and if they saw something that wasn't already known, they would just make something up.
He also liked to keep his prisoners awake for days on end. So imagine you're trying to fall asleep, sleeping in a very probably cold dungeon, not being fed, and as fast as you're going to fall asleep, you're woken up again. So at that point, you would just be like, you'd admit to anything, because you'd be like,
that was one of the many ways of torturing, was sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
Like I said, you all over there were way worse than we were over here.
Us British do seem to have a taste for the macabre. And I remember the London dungeons, they used to you walk round and they have all these different waxworks and showing you different things. And you just go, boiling, beheading, all this kind of stuff. Who thought up these methods? The other thing as well, this man would have been feared, but he would have actually fed on that fear, and he would have also enjoyed the fact that he was scared.
Well, he was. I think he was a sociopath, psychopath. Yeah. He was. I think a lot of them got off on the torture.
Yes,
I mean,
for sure.
how could someone do that to someone else without getting anything from it?
Well, it was all
Yeah.
about the money. Vincent Price, I believe, played Matthew Hopkins in a movie, and
Yeah.
I have seen the movie, and it's very, very effective. It's very good, but I don't think they've played him scary enough, because I think he was terrified. Women were terrified.
Well,
However,
sure.
some say his own end is far from clear, because he kind of disappears, and some say he drowned undergoing his own swimming trial, after being accused of witchcraft, and that would be like karma coming back and biting you
Well,
in the ass.
yeah, but I mean, it seems to me like the end to a lot of these witch trials and everything ended when it came a little too close to home.
Yes.
When things got a little too close to the ones that were doing all this stuff, then they were like, okay, well, maybe we don't need to, do this anymore.
But I also think it's a good way of getting rid of people, isn't it? It's a good way of getting rid of poor
Sure.
women, or if a woman rejected you, or if you had an
Yeah.
affair with a woman, and you could accuse her, she bewitched me, she took me to bed, she did this. It doesn't matter what you did. Women were in a very vulnerable position. I mean,
Right.
England in that time was a very unsettled place. You had the English Civil War, and everything broke down. Eventually, some decades later, things got a lot more sorted out, and the last execution for witchcraft took place in Devon, Exeter, Devon, in March 1684. So we're bringing up that because we wanted to talk about Pendle, Matthew Hopkins, and the King of England, James I, who all get my microphone here soon, who all basically played a part. Because then we cross the ocean when we
Yeah.
go to Salem, and this is where tell us all about Salem. What happened in Salem?
Well, there was actually two Salems. There was the first one was called Salem Town,
Mm-hmm.
and it was more at the port where people came in. And then there was Salem Village, and it was farther inland, farther back, kind of in the country. I think one was, Salem Town was more like the city and the country. So in June 1692 through May, and just listen, June to May. I mean, not even a year.
No.
And there was 19 convicted and hanged. And there was 19 were hanged. One was pressed. And then I think 8 more were imprisoned. And died. A lot of them died in prison because of the what am I trying to say? The prison was bad, in other words. I don't know what the word is. I've lost it.
What would life
But
have
anyway,
been like? What would life have been like, Val, at that time in Salem? What would life be like for women in that time?
well, women were looked down upon because the men ran it. Everything came down to what the men said. It wasn't. It wasn't a good place for women of any kind. High status, low status, whatever. It was anyone could be accused of anything. But at first, in 1689, Samuel Paris, a merchant from Boston, became the pastor of the village Congregational Church. Paris had studied theology at Harvard, brought his wife, 3 children, 2 slaves. The slaves were John Indian and Tituba. Paris's Orthodox Puritan theology.
We're losing you, Val.
The way he.
It's coming and going, your signal. That's okay. Is it back? Are you back?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's weird, isn't it? Something's interfering with that.
Yeah. Somebody don't want me to know. So the way he had studied at Harvard and his Puritan theology had separated the church. It completely divided the congregation because a lot didn't agree with the way he done things. Paris's daughter, niece, and their friend began indulging in a fortune-telling game. And from the way I understand it, you crack an egg in a glass or a bowl, and you watch it move. The egg white will form a picture, and that will tell you, what your future husband's occupation will be, how things are going to turn out, things like that.
Basically, fortune
they believe. Yes, they were doing this game. They called it a game. Most likely, the Tituba had told them about this game. She came from Barbados, which had the voodoo in her background. So she would, tell them stories about this stuff. They started doing it. The girls started having fits, scream, make odd sounds, contort their bodies in certain ways, and complain of being bitten or pinched.
Yes, it's very much a frenzy, isn't it?
Yes. Looking back on it, a lot of scientists believe that aside from just mass hysteria, the suggestion, they think that it was compulsive ergotism, and that's caused by eating bread or cereal with the fungus ergot in it. So it kind of messes up your body, makes you vomit, makes you convulse, hallucinate, do a whole lot of things. So a lot of people think that that's what it was that was causing these children to do that.
So it was like like a hysteria?
Well, they think that it was psychological, but it could also have been caused by this fungus called ergot, and it gets into like grain, and it forms the fungus eats it away, so it kind of like when you take it or when you eat it, it's kind of like a drug. It can cause convulsions, it can cause you to hallucinate, to different. So a lot of the things that the girls did, it could be the result. I mean, could be the result of eating this bad cereal or bread or grain. It was funny though, because the odd behavior that they did, it mirrored that of the children of a Boston family. And it was written about in a book by Cotton Mather in 1689. So they would have definitely had access to that. Which that family was, the doctor was unable to diagnose what was wrong with the family.
Mm-hmm.
So he deemed it supernatural. So the girls would have had access to read about that. So they would know how to act if it was an act.
And we're talking about Puritan, very much Puritan background. And these people would probably come from Britain. A lot of these people had come from Britain, from a Puritan background. And it was, if you were in a Puritan background and family, well, even dancing was banned and frowned upon. And there was so much, it's all the devil's work, it's all this. So there's very much already a background of, this is not allowed, this is the devil's work. So very much these people are very little, what's the word I want to use? Leeway to actually have any kind of fun.
Well, yeah, I mean, anytime anything was done that somebody didn't like, it was just deemed, the devil's work or, wrong for whatever reason. And then you couldn't do it just because somebody didn't like it. But after all this started happening, one of Tituba's neighbors told her to make a witch cake, and that would, tell her who it was that was hurting the girls. So she made a witch cake, gave it to the dog. You take grain and you take the urine of the afflicted. You bake a cake and you feed it to the animal. If the animal dies, it means it's a witch or whatever, or it will reveal who it is.
It's pretty gruesome.
Right. But Tituba was a slave. She was already thought of, badly. So even though she took the advice of a neighbor or a churchgoer, it still come back on her.
Yeah.
Because it didn't help finding who was afflicting the girls. All it did was something just failed. It upset Mr. Paris, her owner, and he saw it as blasphemy. So even though a churchgoer told her to do it, the preacher saw it as blasphemy.
Yeah.
And he pressured the girls, once again, into naming Tituba as the one that's doing it. Now the girls,
an easy target, isn't she?
Oh, absolutely. They named Tituba, and then they also named Sarah Good, who was a beggar, and Sarah Osborne. Now, Sarah Osborne was bedridden, but she had been scorned for having a romantic affair with an indentured servant. So, see, all three were looked down on. They were very much looked down on.
Yes.
So even though Sarah Osborne was bedridden, it didn't make a difference.
So, I mean, that's what happened, isn't it? You got your bedridden woman. She can't get out and do anything, but she's still accused.
Yeah. So the Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, they called her Goody Osborne, but Sarah and Sarah refused to admit that they were witches. there was so much put on Tituba to do it, being in her position. I think, being back then, being a slave, being pressured so hard, I think it would be hard for anybody in that position not to admit something. So she admitted that she was visited by Satan. She was made to sign the devil's book. And in that devil's book, she saw Sarah Good's name, Sarah Osborne's name, and 7 others' names that she couldn't read. So they forced her into admitting something that she didn't do. So the girls, the same girls, they started identifying others, not just outcasts, but they started pointing out upstanding men, like Rebecca Nurse. She was, high profile, wife of, one of the judges. So after weeks of hearings, the governor, Sir William Phipps, ordered an official court which had 7 judges. The accused got no counsel, so they had to, defend themselves. So you go.
You're coming and
7
going again.
judges.
Let's go back. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yep. It's just coming and going, so we're sort of missing out on a couple of words. Carry on, though, love.
Well, it's trying to storm outside. So
that's what it is. That'd be the work of witches, Val.
I'm telling you. Okay, so the court had allowed spectral evidence as proof. As the accused, who was up there defending herself because she got no counsel, the girls would, whimper and babble and writhe around on the floor and, scream and say that they were seeing the apparition, things like that. Those who confessed were believed to receive their punishment from God. Those who refused were subjected to the court's sense of justice. Bridget Bishop, on June the 10th, was the first to be hanged after being found guilty.
Oh.
A lot of people think she was burned at the stake, but she wasn't. She was hanged.
Mm-hmm.
The Americans never burned anybody at the stake. The only thing we did was we hanged, imprisonment, and pressed. After that, on June the 19th, 5 more were convicted and hanged, including Nurse and Good. So Sarah Good and Rebecca Nurse were also hanged. George Burroughs, who had served as a minister in Salem Village from 1680 to 1683, was summoned from his new house in Maine and accused for being the witch's ringleader. So he wasn't even there. They made him come back. He was convicted along with 4 others, hanged on August the 19th. While on the gallows, he recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, which they had said that if you were a witch, you couldn't recite the Lord's Prayer. He was hung anyway. On September the 22nd, 8 more convicted were hanged, including Martha Corey, while her husband, who was accused, was pressed between 2 heavy stones for 2 days until he died for not admitting he was a witch. He was the only one that was pressed to death. Until October the 3rd, Cotton Mather's father condemned the use of spectral evidence. Trials started to get less and eventually stopped in May of 1693. So, once Mather's father come in, I don't know if he just had sense or, but he decided there was going to be no more of this spectral evidence.
Explain what spectral evidence actually is.
Spectral evidence is when, like, the girls would claim that the specter of Sarah Good was hurting them, or the apparition of, Tituba had forced them to do something. So anything that was not legitimately proven, where they could see it, hear it, it was out. They couldn't use it. And that brought down, a lot of, it stopped the killings. More were imprisoned after that, but, there was no more of this, you're convicted because the specter, you're whatever. It came down to sheer evidence after that. The saddest one that I really have read about is Sarah Good. She was one of the first ones to be accused. Well, they put her in prison first. And then they put her 4-year-old daughter, Dorothy, in prison with her for being a witch. While she was in prison, Dorothy was in prison from March 92 till December of 92. And then she was released on 50-pound bond.
Wow.
Okay. While she was in prison with her mother, Sarah had another baby in prison. And they named her Mercy Good. She was born and died shortly after she was born in 92. So, because of the conditions of the prison and the outbreaks of disease and the poor nutrition, the baby didn't survive.
No.
But Dorothy, can you imagine what a 4-year-old is going through when they are thrown in jail in these horrible conditions with your mother, seeing them, torture your mother, seeing her give birth, the baby dies shortly after. Then your mother is dragged out of the cell and hung while you're left in the cell to rot.
And did she stay in that cell or did she get freed?
She stayed in the cell for, 9 months?
Wow.
And then she was released on bond it was 50 pounds for bond. And Dorothy did go on to live, a pretty good life, but it seems, I didn't have it right down, but I think I read this later, that later she was tried again. Let's see.
It seems that there were some men accused of witchcraft as well. And they were pretty much not shown much mercy either.
No.
And also, I noticed that animals were used in Salem. And now I know that you've just very much talked about how they identify a witch in Salem by using, the bread, but they actually killed 2 dogs.
Well, they decided they were familiars. They thought they thought that witches could transform into animals
Yeah.
or other people. So it wasn't just, that they could turn into animals. They could literally turn into anyone they wanted to.
This is a terrible time to be poor, to be in that area, and to be a woman. But also, it's very much like they use the Malleus Maleficarium. That book was bought. We started talking about that book last week. That book, which was called, what is it called? The Hammer of the Witches. That book was used in Salem as well as Pendle. And it was, so was King James's first demonology was used as well. These books by these gentlemen have been used in these trials against these women. And the Malleus Maleficarium, it was almost like gospel. And they used that book, and it actually came out in the trial of the Salem witches. And who knew that, all hundreds of years later, as we're talking different centuries, that book came out in the 14th century. You're now talking at something like 1692 or something like that out there. That book is being used again to bring up about what truly is a witch. And that's why it was such an important book. And people don't realize, when you talk about the Malleus Maleficarium, this book changed people's lives. It killed people. It also took away mothers from their families. Children saw their parents hung or drowned, or in the UK certainly, and Scotland, burnt at the stake. Your take on it, Val, looking at your take on Salem, looking back at it, what do you think was the beginning of the end of them stopping the witch trials out there?
Honestly, I think it was when it got too close to home.
Yeah.
Because they actually, I think the one that brought it not to a screeching halt, but made them, say, okay, it's gone far enough, was when William Phipps, the law, or the judge, his wife got accused.
Yeah.
So, I think that made him see, okay, I think we're going a little overboard. I think it's gone far enough. And, it's funny because if all you have to do is hurt the right one, and a lot of bullshit stops.
Yes.
So I think that's really what happened, was that it just got too close. It got too intimate for the judges and what was her name? I'm losing my mind, I'm telling you. Dorothy. It says that when it was a dungeon-like prison for 8 months. And then she saw her mother, give birth to her sister, saw her sister die, then saw her mother dragged up and hanged. It says that it forever altered Dorothy. Her father later described her as,
I imagine it would. It must be just trauma.
Oh, yeah. Her father described her as chargeable, having little or no reason to govern herself. It's Dorothy's status person to be a priest.
It's a shame,
Concluding her story.
Yep, it's coming and going, so we're only getting bits and pieces of it.
It's probably the storm.
I wanted to
You hear me now?
I can hear. I want to look at Giles Corey. You talked about him being slowly pressed to death. What an interesting
2 days.
way to do that, because he was 71, wasn't he? 71 years of age.
He was, well, I don't know exactly, but he was older. Yeah.
And he was like an innocent man and refused to take part in the trials.
Yeah.
And they actually, his last words apparently were more weight, which
Yeah.
apparently was a final attempt to actually show he was innocent. It is even told that the sheriff took his cane and pressed Giles' tongue back into his mouth just before he died at the end of 2 days of being slowly crushed. What kind of torture and death punishment comes up with crushing people? I mean, I know us Brits were pretty like far out there for doing stuff, but crushing people? Oh, she's
There's
got
an idea.
No, your reception
See, there
is
was
just...
a plank.
Oh, I see. Yep. Okay.
A
Oh,
plank
I
laid on
see.
him, and then weights put on top of it.
Yeah.
So, I
And
mean,
that,
it took
you're
him 2
basically
days.
suffocated, and everything starts to
Yeah.
break. People are fascinated by Salem. Arthur Miller's The Crucible, obviously the very famous book, and eventually goes on to be a movie. Salem and Pendle stand out as in these terrible crimes against women for being accused of doing things that really they did not do or were accused of.
Right.
And the other one we were going to look at is the Maggie's Wall Memorial, which is in Scotland. And I've come back because your reception is coming and going, so I'm trying to bring in while that's alternating.
I do
But
apologize.
no, it's okay. It's one of those things, girl. I wanted to look at Maggie's Wall because I didn't actually know about this. My maiden name is Dunning, spelled Dunning. And it's a small village at Dunning, settled in the parklands of, see if I can pronounce this right, Duncrub Castle. And there is a monument. It's a collection of stones 20 feet high, topped with a cross and decorated with gifts left by visitors. And they leave things like money, shells, fluffy animals, and little tea candles. There it is, Maggie's Wall. The stone bears the words in stark white lettering, Maggie Wall was burnt here 1657 as a witch. Now, if you think that Scotland was pretty much home to 3,000, over 3,500 people, and a lot of people were accused of witchcraft between the 15 and 1700s, most of them being women. Now, you're talking about Scotland. You're not talking about England, where we're not going to burn them. We're gonna drown them or hang them because we're so wonderful like that. But Scotland's like, no, we don't have a problem. We're gonna burn them at the stake. Now, not much is known about Maggie's Wall, but we wanted to use this as an example, as in the fact that somebody has built a tribute or left a tribute to Maggie Wall being tried as a witch. There's no record of this monument until 1866, although a forest surrounding the monument called Maggie Wall's Wood was documented in 1829. Some claim that she did exist. Other records simply don't. Some locals think that it was a member of the Rollos, a powerful family that lived at the Duncrub Castle, had an affair with Maggie and built the monument out of guilt. The thing about Maggie's Wall is that we're talking about burning women at the stake. That is a terrible way to die.
I
It
can
is not.
imagine.
It is not quick. If you were lucky, you were given some small powder of herbs or gunpowder, which would encourage you to burn quicker. But Scotland seems to believe that purifying people, as Mary Tudor did with the Protestants, purifying them by burning. I can't imagine as a woman watching another woman being burnt or anyone being burnt at the stake. But I also think
I can't imagine the noise. I would imagine dreams you would never leave you.
Well, you
would have those forever.
And the thing is, what I bring this up is that we are so quick today in social media to accuse someone of doing something. It becomes a witch hunt. We still use that word, witch hunt, whether it's political, whether it's relationship. We still use the word, it's a witch hunt. They're on a witch hunt now. And what that basically means is they're determined to bring that person down, to bring them to a point where they can take their power, use things against them. And it seems that women very much over the years have been the scapegoat. And Maggie's Wall remains. I'm just bringing up something else with it. It remains to be a mystery, but somebody cared enough to put this memorial up, Val.
Yeah. I just wonder what you were saying about nowadays. I wonder how many people would be that quick if they knew that it was going to get the other person killed.
Yes. Yeah.
And what's sad is I think a lot of them would still do it, but I think it wouldn't be as rampant as it is. I think it would,
Scotland has a very dark history. I mean, England does, but Scotland has a very dark history of witch hunting hysteria. 200 years of a window. As I said, 3,800 tried for witchcraft. And 2,500 people put to death. Now, near Dunning is a place called Kincladdy Wood. Has a well-established story, 3 witches and a wizard being burned beneath an oak tree. And then in 1662, Dunning had its own witch trials, but there's no record of Maggie's Wall. They believe that somebody put up a tribute as a homage of all the people that were tortured and killed in the witch hunt. And they put up Maggie's Wall as like a tribute. In Scotland, because James VI was their king, it was seen to be encouraged very much so, but he didn't burn them in England, which is, I found interesting that around the same time he was burning them in Scotland, he was drowning and hanging them in England.
Well, do you think that he didn't want to be known as that harsh? He wanted to be lesser.
I think also as well
easier, so to speak.
I think it's also because James I of England was not particularly welcomed by the British people. He was, after all, Scottish. England was always at war with Scotland. They loved Elizabeth I, and all of a sudden, here was James I, quite a complex man. Bisexual to the point, and also they think later on just he was gay. He also had a lifestyle that some could question, how he was accusing of other people of doing such depraved things.
Well, that's that thing. When you have that power, you can do what you want to, but nobody else can.
Yes.
Yeah. It was kind of that. You don't look at what I do. I'll do what I want to do. Mm-hmm. You do as I do. Don't do as I do as I say, type thing.
It's interesting that Joan of Arc was also burnt at the stake for heretic, being a heretic. It seems that it's very easy to just like tie the woman up and burn her. What we wanted to do tonight was remember these women from Pendle, in Dunning, and also from Salem, because they lived a life. They very much were real people. This is what they went through, and
it was harsh living, period.
Very.
But not to mention having to look over your shoulder and make sure nobody was seeing you do something that could possibly get you accused of, being a witch and have you hung.
Yes.
For simply trying to live.
And also, I think that the common sense seems to have, back then, you're not even looking at common sense. You are driven by what the church says. You're driven by these books. And it's like, if you question it, if you like with Giles, I think it was Giles Corey, wasn't it, in Salem? If you question it and say, this is ridiculous, these trials, none of this is true, you were punished.
And it wasn't like, when people think, oh, well, they threw you in prison. Okay, you weren't in a cell with a bed and 3 meals a day. You were on the floor with nothing.
Yeah.
No bathroom. The cells were full of people, small, old, young. It was very, very disease ridden
and smelly, I would imagine.
Oh my God, I can imagine.
Lancaster Castle is open to the public. It's a very formidable place. There's a gatehouse that the witches would have gone through in 1612. They would have travelled 50 miles on foot. Then they were thrown into a dark, damp cell and left for months. It was also known as the Witch's Tower, and it still stands today. You can go and visit it. Visitors can peer through the iron-barred door down the dark stone stairs that lead to the cell below. And the small room with damp walls and metal rings in the floor has hardly any light at all and is virtually unchanged in 400 years. And they were held for several months in Pendle, while for the Pendle witches in Lancaster, while they awaited trial. And one of the prisoners most likely died before even being called to the stand. The thing about that as well, if you're kept in the dark for a long period of time, it's cold, it's damp, you're not fed, you are peeing and pooing where you stand, you have humiliation and sleep deprivation. They did not care how you turned out. And most people say that when they peer through the doors today, they still cannot believe and they turn away from how the appalling conditions they were kept in.
I was trying to find here's a pretty good description of one of the cells.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
yeah.
It wasn't, okay, I'm just going to lay here and not do anything because I'm in prison and they're going to bring me something to eat. No.
And it's almost like from something really small, Val, it spiraled into something huge, like the smile, and this is why I'm saying if people need to watch what they say and do, because it can, before you start accusing someone of doing something, whatever, and I think there was a call back in England, certainly was a warning that if you were a witch, you would be found, you would be tortured, and you would be executed. And
but think about it. If you have a nemesis, if you have a family that has more than you do, and you're jealous of them, If you have someone who talked badly to you, you
Yeah.
know, all you got to do, go to someone and say, I saw them in my room last night, a specter.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all you have to do, and they'll do the rest of it.
I want to, I bring up a place called Tring in Hertfordshire in the UK. In 1751, Ruth Osborne and her husband John were accused of witchcraft, dragged from their place of shelter in Tring Church, obviously seeking sanctuary, and publicly ducked. Ruth later died. And her inquest was held at the Half Moon pub, which still exists, as does the church. I mean, if you're going to get a person, showing off my call here, if you're going to get a person, you're going to keep ducking them in water. You're going to be every time you go in, you're going to be taking a breath, and there would be people, baiting you, basically chanting, screaming at you. It would have been absolutely terrifying.
Sure.
Um,
And you
and
had people throwing rocks at you, and it was almost inevitable that
yes,
you would not survive it. I think there's very few that did survive.
coming to that last execution for witchcraft in Britain, in Dornoch in 1722. Janet Horn, as we mentioned, was the last one. She was stripped, covered in tar, and paraded through in a barrel before being burned. A witch's stone is said to mark the site where she was burned. I mean, this is terrible, but unfortunately, it's our history. And Matthew Hopkins, James the the judges of Salem,
Y'all were just mean.
they were all to blame, of first of all wanting power, certainly enjoying their job more than their job's worth. And what kind of human being enjoys seeing another human being suffer? You have to
Well,
ask about them.
a sociopath that feels that gets more power from torturing someone else lesser than them. I
Absolutely.
mean, they were drunk with power.
Yep.
When you have the power just to tell someone to kill somebody else, I think you feel like you have that power over life and death, and it gives you that sense of superiority, and they love that. Not to mention they got paid a hell of a lot.
Yes, they did. And I think that you've hit the nail on the head. That is exactly what it was all about, was money.
Yeah.
If you get a chance to visit Pendle UK, in the UK, Pendle in the UK, very pretty town. I have not been. I know people who have. Very pretty.
I would love to come over there and go to all these places.
And Salem, Val, have you been to Salem?
I haven't.
I would love to go to
You
Salem.
need to come over here and we'll go to Salem, and then I'll come over there and we'll go to the other.
And Dunning as well. Like, I have to go and see where my family name is from. I hope in the time that we've had today, we have perhaps done women justice. It's a sad story of women that were innocent. They weren't witches. And there is a difference between pointing the finger at somebody and absolutely being hung for it.
Well, hell, if they were witches, none of them would have been hung.
Correct.
Hello.
Go.
That's stupid. I mean, okay, if you drown, you're innocent. If you, if I was a real witch, you ain't gonna be putting that on me to dunk me.
Ken comes up with this.
I'll turn you into a pig.
Ken comes up with an interesting comment. You all look like witches dressed in black. Why is it women in black have that, reputation of being a witch because they're in black? And it's like, no, not really. They're just the wicked women colors, red, black, and white. But at the end of the day, yet again, there's a lot of prejudice against witchcraft still in 2024.
Yeah,
We hope we've done them justice. I think there is so much on this subject to talk about. It's
there is.
not just straightforward. If you get a chance to go to Salem, if you get a chance to go to Pendle or Dunning, please do pay your respect to these amazing women who basically
Yeah.
died. There is one more story from this witch series, if you want to call it that, and that is the European witch trials, which Carly was looking at in detail for us. Now, we don't know if we're going to do that next week. Wicked Women might be here next week. We might not, because I am incredibly busy in the month of August with the Dark Huntress. So it's literally I'm trying to fit us all in. But I think for us, Val, I hope we've done justice to these, or at least brought their story so that
Well,
people could
at
think about
least at least showed the struggle that men also, don't get me wrong, but a lot of women, I mean, mainly women went through,
yes,
um, because we didn't really have a voice.
no,
Um, and as you can see, there was several men also, I think 5 men in
yeah,
Salem, um, had common sense enough to know that
it was rubbish.
that the women were being accused, out of these silly excuses.
Yes,
But, so many men were drunk with power, and they went for the people that they knew they could control.
yes,
You know, back then, men knew they could control women
yeah,
because we were under. They had way more status. They had, you know, we women, were supposed to obey them. I mean, to the letter, whatever they decided. So, I feel like these were strong women that refused to admit something that wasn't true.
and strong women of poor backgrounds who had no support, nobody fighting their corner, and basically, even with kept in terrible conditions, still survived to go on and basically be killed.
Yeah.
And because you pretty much knew if you were accused of it.
And I feel extremely sorry for the children that had to go through things like that.
Yeah,
Um, I reading Dorothy Good's story, I can't imagine. I know she was 4, but the conditions she was kept in, her sister, dying with her, then her mom being dragged off and killed,
yeah,
and then she's having to stay there by herself,
yeah.
and then finally, finally she is out, and eventually her father did get compensation.
But it's also the stigmatism of being the daughter of a witch.
Yeah,
Like would stay with you. Well, your mother was a witch, so you must be
exactly.
a
And
witch.
I can imagine why she became the way she did.
And so many movies, Val, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, they make look at the Wizard of Oz. The Wicked Witch of the West.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, they make out these women are ugly and crooked looking, and anyone who's a witch. And yet, if you go into pagan background and the Druids, etc., these women were were seen to be in awe of them. And I think along the way, you're talking about a time where women were very much persecuted and vulnerable by men. I have to say, I'm not trying to be
Well, it
different.
was it was the time was, if a man saw a beautiful woman, whether he was married, she was married, didn't matter. If he wanted her, he would take her and then just blame it on her. And he wouldn't get in trouble because
Mhm.
she bewitched him. It was her fault, you know.
Absolutely.
So regardless of the circumstances, a lot of times we got a bad rap just for being women.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To end the show, I want to thank everybody that's come along tonight and watched us. And Carly, we hope you're better soon so you can come and join us. The European witch trials were a lot different to the UK and the USA.
Yeah.
In fact, they were far worse, and that's the one that we will finish this series on. And we want people to remember that, as I said, these were real people. They did,
Yeah.
this happened. It's not just a movie. It's not just a book. It's based on real life. And animals and men, children and women all lost their lives through it. So thank you for everyone for watching Sister Witches with my sister witch over there. Even saying that years ago would have had me probably, drowned or hung, etc. over here, Val.
Oh, absolutely. And over here, I'd have been hung.
You would have been, exactly. And people, as I say, remember the Malleus Maleficarium, the book that began it all, and King James the First of England, his book Demonology, finished it up behind two men who didn't have a clue. One was bisexual to the point of being probably more gay, and the other one was a monk, knew absolutely nothing pretty much about women.
Who probably just got his butt hurt from a woman telling him off or something.
Exactly. So coming up this week, Val, let's just run through a few things before we end. We have the lovely Scotty Roberts Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with the Intrepid radio show. He's at 9:00 your time, which is my 3:00 in the morning. And I will be back, all being well, with Scotty on Tuesday with Robertson at 10 p.m. UK. And Val, your shows, bring up those times?
I will be Saturday for Myths, Legends, and Paranormal at 7:00. Last night it was 8 because I overslept.
Mm-hmm.
But it's usually at 7. And then we're back here on Sunday.
We are Wicked Women. All being well, we'll be back next Sunday at 10 p.m. Val, I want you just to show the little things that you've got here before we end. Something that everybody might want on their in their handbag. Look at this.
We have keychains, Wicked Women.
Beautiful.
This one is mine. It has glitter on the back. I am going to be making several different things on the back: red, black, and white, glitter, plain,
Yep.
different things on the back. So if anybody wants one, just let me know, or let Wendy know.
Yeah, because obviously what we're trying to do is like we're bringing them in from the UK, we're bringing them in from America, but Val obviously is making all these, and it looks fabulous. Absolutely. And the cups as well.
I still have the mugs.
I think we need to do the magnets next.
We can definitely do magnets.
We all need a Wicked Women magnet on our kitchen.
Absolutely.
You are brilliant with your work, Val. Thank you so much for doing that. It has, as I said, we do this. We don't get paid for it. This is all voluntary. We enjoy what we do. We do have a life outside of it, and sometimes we don't always get everything done in time, which is why the Wicked Women website is slightly behind on its being finished. But Val, if you touch the button that takes like, share, and subscribe, you can leave a message for us on YouTube. If you touch the button on Instagram that takes you to Wicked Women 888, you can leave a message and we'll get back, or you can contact Valerie Rasnick over on Facebook, and she will be able to give you her bits. Take us out of the show, Val.
Once we get our website up, we will have several different things, including the magnets, the cups, the keychains, some coasters, different things like that. We'll have some things like that up on it too.
Yeah.
But thank everybody for watching. We really appreciate it. And don't forget to boop that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share us out to anybody that you know might like us.
Absolutely. You know, we're here every Sunday, bringing a bit of wicked to a Sunday.
Everybody needs a little wicked in their weekend.
We do. You're absolutely right. We do. In the meantime, Val, have a wonderful week. Take care of yourself.
You too.
Fellow wicked. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. And in the meantime, be good, be wicked, and take care of yourselves and each other. Bye.
Bye.